By the time Silas Reed understood the silent woman he had carried out of a Faro hall was a surgeon, her steel was already inside his ear. And outside his cabin, 3 armed men were moving through the trees to take her back. That was the night the long silence in his skull finally broke. It started in a mining camp called Red Wash, where men spent silver faster than they earned it, and talked like God had built the territory for their appetites alone. Silas sat at the faro table like a gravestone in a crowded room. He had not heard a human voice in 4 years. A powder caisson had exploded near him at Franklin, and the blast had done more than tear flesh. It had sealed him inside a dead world of pressure, vibration, and memory. He survived by becoming dangerous in other ways. He trapped winter cats in the high timber. He hunted men when the sheriff paid enough. He read shoulders, jaws, and fingertips the way other men read newspapers. He felt hoofbeats through porch planks. He saw lies before they reached a mouth. Silence made most people treat him like he was half absent. His colt made them correct that mistake. Across from him sat Merrick Sloane, a silver broker with polished boots, soft palms, and the look of a man who had confused money with breeding. Sloane was deep in his cups, and deeper in debt. Coin after coin slid away from him. Then his gold watch. Then a signet ring. Still he kept grinning, because men like Sloane always believed the next turn of the card deck would restore the order of the world. Then his eyes drifted to the woman by the back wall. She wore no jewelry, nothing loud, nothing saloon bright, just a pale blue traveling dress that had once been expensive and was now worn at the seams. Her black hair was pinned with severe precision, and in her hands she held a small lacquered box against her ribs so tightly it looked less like luggage and more like a last defense. There was a fading bruise around one wrist. Sloane lifted his chin toward her and threw her into the pot. No man at the table laughed after that. Silas could not hear the words, but he did not need to. He saw the shape of them in every face in the room. He saw Sloane's smug little flourish. He saw 2 drifters at the bar turn to watch. He saw the woman go perfectly still, the stillness of somebody who had already learned that panic only feeds wolves. Something old and cold moved in his gut. He pushed the rest of his stake forward. Sloane dealt. Silas never looked at the crowd. He only watched the cards, then the broker's eyes, then the woman's bruised hand around that lacquered box. When the final card came down, Silas laid open queens full over tens. Sloane had 2 pair, and the face of a man being skinned. For one long second, the camp forgot how to breathe. Then Sloane leaned back with a mean smile, like cruelty might still save his pride. He said something to the woman over his shoulder, dismissive and venomous. Silas could not hear it. He only saw her eyes sharpen, not with fear this time, but with hate, too disciplined to waste itself. Silas stood, collected the money, and stopped in front of her. He did not reach for her. He did not smile. He only jerked his head once toward the door. Come, or don't. After a beat, she walked past him and out into the white evening glare. That should have been the strangest part of the night. It was not. The ride into the Wind River timber took hours. Silas stayed on his bay mare. The woman rode the pack mule, spine straight as a rifle rod, that lacquered box never leaving her lap. He tried once, near a creek crossing, to tell her his name. One finger to his chest. Silas. A rough sound he could not hear leave his own throat. Then a question with his eyes. She answered with nothing. But silence did not mean emptiness. He saw plenty. She checked the tree line every few breaths. She clocked distance to water before he did. She noticed a hawk burst from the pines and turned to search the slope beneath it, as if reading disturbance the way a scout would. She never once asked for help getting down a steep grade. By the time his cabin appeared between the black trunks, he knew two things. First, she had spent too long living under threat to mistake caution for fear. Second, whatever was in that box mattered more to her than food, money, or freedom. His place sat alone above a ravine, built from pine logs and old stubbornness. One room below, sleeping loft above, woodpile under the eaves, game hooks, rifle pegs, stove, no softness anywhere. Silas lit a lantern and set bread, dried venison, and water on the table. Then he pointed to the loft and gave the simplest welcome he knew how to make. She did not thank him. She did not refuse him either. She crossed the room once, slowly, her fingertips grazing the table edge, stove corner, door latch, window frame. Not admiring, measuring, counting steps, marking exits. When she climbed to the loft with the lacquered box in her hands, Silas took out the slate he used in town and wrote 3 words. You are safe. He held it up. Her face changed for the first time, and not toward relief. It went older, tired, in a way he recognized from men who had survived things they no longer expected anyone to understand. She read the words, looked at him, then carried the box upstairs without taking the chalk. The next morning she was gone from the loft before dawn. Silas found her at the creek, filling buckets as if she had always belonged to the routine of the place. By noon she had weeded the sorry patch of onions beside the cabin. By evening she had repaired a split seam in his coat with stitches so neat they looked painted on. She still did not speak. She still guarded the box. Yet she was no burden. She moved through his life like a careful blade, cutting disorder away wherever she found it. They built a rough language out of signs and observation. A hand lifted toward dark clouds meant rain. 2 fingers tapped against the woodpile meant he was low. A glance toward the ridge meant she had seen deer moving. A flat palm near the stove meant, stay back, it will spit. And slowly, without permission from either one of them, the cabin stopped feeling like a hideout and started feeling watched over from 2 directions. Silas caught her studying him when the pain in his right ear surged. It had become worse in recent months. Not the old dead ache from the blast, but a hot, burrowing pressure that sometimes sent lightning through his jaw. He would rub the scar behind the ear without thinking. Each time her gaze sharpened. Not pity, assessment. That unsettled him more than sympathy ever could. One evening she placed a cup of mint water beside him on the porch. He took it. Their fingers touched. She did not flinch away this time. In the deepening blue, with moths beating themselves stupid against the lantern glass, he gave her the first real smile he had shown since she arrived. Her mouth did not smile back, but it softened. And then her eyes slid toward his ear again. That was when the trouble finally reached his ridge. Silas found it by the river where the mud held memory. 2 horses with iron shoes, 3 men, counting the walker who favored his left heel. He had seen that drag step in red wash. Sloane's kennel had come hunting. He ran all the way home. The woman was outside, hanging his washed shirt on a line between 2 pines. One look at his face, and she straightened. He grabbed a stick, knelt in the dirt, and drew 3 riders, then a rifle, then the trail. Her color dropped. For a single breath, the terror from the Faro hall returned. Then it hardened. She nodded once and went inside. Silas checked the Winchester above the hearth, the shells under the bed, the spare Colt under the loose floorboard. He expected her to hide. Instead, she came down from the loft, carrying the lacquered box in both hands, and set it on the table with an almost ceremonial care. Not now, he wanted to tell her. Men first. But she had already seen something he had not. The pain inside his head slammed so hard he had to brace one palm against the table. Heat speared behind his eye. His vision narrowed. The room leaned. She was beside him immediately, one hand on his shoulder, then 2 fingers pointing to his ear with a command in her face that made argument feel childish. Outside, night was draining through the trees. Inside, she opened the box. Not jewelry, not letters, not keepsakes. In black velvet lay tools, fine steel probes, curved needles, tiny clamps, tweezers delicate as watch springs, a surgeon's traveling kit, wrapped and preserved as if it were scripture. Silas stared from the instruments to her face. She picked up the tweezers, pointed at his ear, then pointed to the chair by the fire. "Trust me." He did not trust anyone, not fully, not after war, not after the years that followed. But pain had already bent him, and her eyes held the calm of a person who knew exactly what she was about to do. So he sat. She drew the lantern close and turned his head with astonishing steadiness. Her fingers were warm. The steel was not. He felt the first probing touch just inside the canal and almost jerked away. Her other hand tightened against his shoulder, anchoring him. Again the tweezers went in, deeper this time, searching past scar tissue, wax, years of neglect, Whatever rot had nested in the dark place the blast had ruined. Then she found it. The pressure changed. What had been pain became movement. A thin, sickening wriggle deep in his head. Every muscle in his body locked. His hand shot for the arm of the chair, hard enough to whiten the knuckles. She did not let go. She worked with tiny, brutal precision, drawing something upward from inside him, while the cabin, the trees, the whole world narrowed to revulsion and pressure and her impossible control. Then one sharp pull. Release. She stepped back and dropped the thing into a glass vial before it could escape. Silas bent forward, gagging on air, one hand clamped to his ear. When his vision cleared, he looked at the vial in the lantern light. A black cave centipede, long as a man's finger, battered but alive, its many legs scratching frantically against the glass. Somewhere in the years since the blast, it had crawled into the ruined warmth of his ear and stayed there, hidden behind pain, wax, and scar, poisoning every hope he had buried. She must have recognized the signs from the way he rubbed the ear, from the fever behind the eye, from the pattern of the swelling. He had called himself broken. She had seen a problem. Then the world changed. At first it was almost nothing, a whispering hiss, so faint he thought it might be memory. He lifted his head. The lantern flame. He was hearing the lantern flame. A second sound followed, a wooden tick from the cooling stove. Then the thud of his own pulse. Then the fabric rustle of her sleeve as she moved. The old silence did not merely crack, it burst apart. He looked at her in disbelief. For the first time since he had known her, she spoke. "Look at me." Not a vibration imagined in his bones, not the shape of lips, a voice, clear, low, and carefully controlled. Silas stared at her like a man seeing rain fall upward. "You can hear me now." He might have answered. He never knew, because the next sound came from outside. A boot scraping bark. Then a man's voice, ugly with confidence, from the dark beyond the window. "Open up, Reed. Mr. Sloane wants his property." The miracle lasted exactly one breath. Silas rose too fast, the room surging with sound, fire crackle, floor creak, wind at the chinks, his own ragged breathing. It was too much, too loud, too sudden. But danger had edges, he understood. He grabbed the Winchester. She crossed the room and blew out the lantern, dropping them into moonlit shadow. "One at the back," she whispered. He heard her. He heard her. She pointed to the hearth. He ripped up the loose board and took the spare Colt from its hiding place. Then he looked at her and, without stopping to wonder why it felt natural, placed the revolver in her hand. She checked the weight like she had done it before. The first shot shattered the door latch. Splinters burst inward. Smoke and cold air knifed through the room. Silas dropped beside the front window and worked the Winchester to his shoulder. Outside, boots churned dirt. One man rushed the porch, confident the deaf hunter inside could be fooled by silence. That mistake killed him. Silas fired through the door as the silhouette hit it. The recoil slammed his tender senses. The blast was enormous, brutal, overwhelming, and magnificent. A scream tore across the yard. He levered another round in and nearly laughed from the sheer violence of hearing the metal click. At the rear wall, a second muzzle flashed. May shouted, "Down!" Silas ducked on instinct. The ball took a chunk from the log above his head. She fired back from the stove corner, not wildly, not with panic, but with the compact discipline of someone who understood timing. The man outside the back window cursed and stumbled away. Another rushed from the woodpile side. Silas did not see him clearly. He heard him, boots on dry needles, coat brushing the wall, a breath sucked before action. He swung toward the sound and fired through the window frame. The man crashed into the rain barrel hard enough to knock it over. For 3 seconds the whole world rang. Then came the quiet details. One body groaning by the porch, water spilling into dirt, May breathing fast but steady, a third set of footsteps running for the trees. Silas moved for the door. Pain flared from the grazing shot along his forearm, but he barely felt it. The last man was fleeing downslope. Before, Silas would have hunted him by broken branches and moon shadows. Now he had something new. Sound. He stepped into the cold night and listened. The man was crashing blind through deadfall to the east, faster than sense, slower than fear. Silas cut downhill, angled through the aspens, and met him where the slope pinched into rock. The outlaw spun too late. Silas struck him with the rifle butt once, then held him face down in the needles until the struggle leaked out of him. When Silas dragged himself back toward the cabin, dawn was just beginning to bleach the ridges. May stood in the doorway with the revolver lowered, but not forgotten. Her dress was dirty at the hem, set on one cheek, and a thin line of blood across one knuckle where the recoil had kissed her. She looked smaller in that pale light than she had during the fight, and far more dangerous. Silas stopped in front of her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he said her name the way a starving man might say the word bread after years without it. May. She closed her eyes. That was the first time she looked like she might break. Not from fear, from release. Weeks later, when the blood was scrubbed from the floor and Sloane's shadow had finally lifted, she told him the rest. She had not been a princess, not even close. She was the daughter of a physician from Guangdong, trained from childhood to grind herbs, set bones, stitch flesh, and observe before touching. Raiders had gutted her village. Traders had sold what survived. By the time Sloane bought her in Cheyenne, he valued her less as a person than as a novelty with manners and a face men would pay to stare at. He never learned what she really carried in that box. Silas did. He learned that her silence had not been emptiness. It had been discipline. She spoke English carefully because she had taught it to herself from discarded books and from listening where men assumed she understood nothing.
She had stayed alive by watching, remembering, waiting. When she first saw him rubbing the ear, saw the scar pattern, saw the fever in his eye, she understood the danger long before he did. She had not saved him out of gratitude. She had saved him because she had decided he was worth saving. By early autumn, the cabin sounded different. The creek had a higher voice at dawn than at noon. Pine boughs answered wind in layers. A mule complained before rain. Tea-water began with a murmur and ended with a rattle. And May's footsteps, though still light, had become the easiest sound in the world to recognize. One evening they sat on the porch while gold light sank through the aspens and the valley below filled with blue shadow. Silas listened to the forest as if it were a language returning piece by piece. "For years," he said quietly, "I thought silence had taken everything." May folded her hands in her lap and looked out toward the darkening ridge. "No," she said, "it only forced you to learn the hard part first." He turned to her. "And what was that?" Her mouth curved, small and real this time. "How to notice what most people waste." The wind moved softly through the timber. Somewhere below, water touched stone. Silas took her hand, feeling the strength in it before he even registered the warmth. He had won a stranger in a cruel game. What he kept was the woman who gave the world back to him, and then stood beside him while it tried to take her away.